Hi, and welcome to the Oikos Family Podcast. I'm Sonja Wood, and today I'm going to share with you Chapter 8 from the little gem, Little Daisy and the Swearing Class. This chapter is titled Daisy's Name, and it's all about how she hears her name, her surname, for the first time, in a long time. If you've been following along in the story, you'll know what I mean by that. And so let me just leave this chapter for you to listen to. I hope you enjoy it.
Chapter 8 Daisy's Name. Indeed, haven't my words come true, sir? Didn't I tell you she was a little lady? Said Betty McCarthy. She stood with her hands on her hips, her head on one side, and her honest face one broad glow of delight and satisfaction. She gazed at the dainty-looking yet humble little creature who stood before her, her young face bright with as much pleasure as Betty's own. Daisy's old friend had come to live at Mrs. Foster's. The lady had wanted a laundrywoman. Because Betty had once held that job in her father's family, she thought she might know of one. She asked the general to inquire. When he asked, Betty eagerly answered she would like the job herself. She had become tired of her present position. She knew of another woman who wanted to purchase her stall. For her heart felt sore for the child, Betty said. To live where she could see Daisy every day and to work once more with Miss Gertrude would make her very happy. Then she would try to put Jack out with some gardener to learn his trade. The general talked the matter over with his wife. They remembered the kind and generous care shown to their Daisy by these poor people. They not only told Betty she could come live with them, but they also put Jack to work under their gardener, although they really had no need for any more hands about the place. Thus did the kindness of this Irishwoman come back to her and bless her. Daisy knew nothing of this arrangement. One afternoon Mrs. Foster said to her, "I am going to speak to the new laundrywoman and gardener's boy. Come with me, Daisy." Half wondering, the little girl obeyed. Her surprise soon changed into delight and gratitude when she saw who the new workers were. In spite of all the pleasure she felt in her new way of life, Daisy's loving heart often longed for the old friends. They had helped her in her time of need. She wanted not only to see them, but to share some of her many comforts with them. How happy Daisy felt when her eye fell upon the two figures standing by the back door. She knew that they had come to live in the same place with her. Daisy flew at Betty, throwing both arms about her neck. She covered her broad, smiling face with warm kisses. Betty returned them, holding her fast in both arms. Then standing back and looking at her from head to foot, Betty spoke to the general the words of approval you read at the beginning of this chapter. "And isn't she fit for a princess?" she continued, unable to keep back her pleasure at the child's improved appearance. "Isn't she fit for a princess? Sassyfoots or no Sassyfoots? Her folks would have a right to the name if they found her now. Sure, I'd be sassy myself to have a child like that. And her not a bit spoiled, but just as loving and free-like as when she had no one but me and Jack." The Fosters told Daisy she could show Betty and Jack the neat little wash-house. The house, shadowed by a fine clump of trees, had the laundry on the first floor and two small bedrooms upstairs. Betty expressed over and over again her satisfaction at the change in her life. Far better, she thought, to stand at the wash-tub or ironing table, breathing the sweet country air, than to do the same at her stall in the hot, dusty, crowded city. As for Jack, when he saw the splendid garden and knew he would work among those lovely flowers, he could not contain himself. He shouted and turned somersault after somersault. Finally, Betty reminded him that Margaret, or Miss Daisy, was a lady now, and he should mind his manners before her. However, Daisy acted like her old self, free from any pride in her new position. Jack found it hard not to still think of her as the little orphan he had pitied and loved for so long. His manners came to his mind with much more force by the sight of the grey-haired old Scot gardener. His playfulness ceased at once in the presence of the man he would work under. Meanwhile, General and Mrs. Foster talked on a very interesting subject. Betty's words about Daisy's lost family gave the lady a new idea. "Frank," she said to her husband, "did you notice what Betty said about Daisy's family?" "Yes," he answered. "I hope she won't turn Daisy's head and make her vain with her praise and flattery." "I'm not worried," said his wife. "Daisy has a right to her name, the modest, unaffected little girl. She has too much sense to become spoiled by the overflowing of Betty's affection. Don't you know that the Irish often say sassy when they mean proud?" "Oh, yes. I have often noticed it in people of Betty's class," answered the General. "What has that to do with Daisy's family?" "Is it not possible that their name is Proudfoot or Proudfoot, instead of the Sassyfoot Betty says?" The General laughed heartily. "Hardly, I think," he said. "And yet, I do not know. It may be." "We will ask Daisy when she comes," said Mrs. Foster. "If Proudfoot was their name, she might remember it when she hears the name spoken. She can hardly have forgotten it so entirely that she would not recognize it. And if we know her name, that will help locate her family." Mrs. Foster spoke the last words more slowly. "Yes," said her husband. Then he gave words to the thought which made her half unwilling to utter them. "And if found, we must give up our Daisy." "But we must search for them," she said. "If we don't, I shall feel as if we had found a lovely jewel that we tried to hide from the rightful owner. I know what terrible longings must fill her mother's heart." A tear dropped from Mrs. Foster's eye on her baby's face, as she clasped it more tenderly than ever in her arms. "Daisy," said the General that evening, "did you ever hear the name of Proudfoot?" Daisy started, drew a quick, gasping breath, and suddenly threw herself into his arms. "That is it!" she cried in a rapid, excited manner. "That is it! That is my name! That is what they called Papa and Mamma. I never heard it since, but I know it now. I am Daisy Proudfoot. I am! The excited child remembered nothing further as she calmed down. The recollection of her name, Proudfoot, filled her with happiness. Still, she could not tell where she belonged. Betty, too, when asked if Proudfoot was the name of Daisy's mother, answered, "Sure it was, ma'am. Didn't I say so all along? Only she always denied it." The matter of the name settled, General Foster again placed advertisements in the papers. This time, he said if any family named Proudfoot had lost a child at sea, they might hear of her at such and such a place. He felt sad to think he might have to part with Daisy, but also felt he must try again to trace her family. Daisy knew nothing of the new search. She felt content and happy in her home and among her new friends. They thought it best not to give her fresh hopes of finding family who might never come. Although still known as Daisy Foster by all in Glenwood, Daisy and the Fosters felt a satisfaction in knowing her true name. Days, weeks, and months went by. Still, no one came to seek the daisy blossom which had been transplanted to such pleasant soil. And there it grew and flourished and did its master's work, proving how much even a simple floweret can do by its own example, teaching others to honor him. Her schoolmates thought a lot of her opinion, and profited by the simple lessons she had taught them. They tried to break themselves of the foolish and sinful habit of using sacred names and things in a careless and unthinking manner. Not only the little girls, but the older ones, and even Miss Collins, learned from our Daisy. They tried to remember the ever-present Lord's ear. They now knew that thoughtless words which dishonoured him or his belongings displeased him. Perhaps they gave more heed to Daisy's words than they would have to any of the other girls. Because such a half-mystery surrounded her, the others treated Daisy with tenderness. They checked their careless speech for her sake at first. As they learned to think more about it, they talked with care for a better and higher reason, until at last they rid themselves of the bad habit. If by chance a careless word came from the lips of any child, the surprised and reproving looks of her companions told her of her wrong and punished her sufficiently. The good influence spread far and wide. Since the little ones behaved so carefully, their parents and older friends felt that they must also. So it came to pass that the families of Glenwood held God's name and word in true reverence and honour. Nearly a year passed by, bringing the Daisy and her sister Flowerettes to another spring,